As more of our lives are automated, as more content is AI generated, it's hard to tell what's real and what isn't. The one thing that you can't replicate is, one, the sense of tribalism and community that you see in sport that is so authentic and ingrained in all of us, all around the world, across cultures, across belief systems. That community of sport is such an incredible thing. And two, the spontaneity, the unpredictability of live sport. You never know what's going to happen.
Good morning. First, just a quick thank you to Caitlin and Ron and the whole iConnections team for putting this all together and having us here today. I'm here today with my former longtime colleague at CAA, Mike Blank, who now serves as managing partner of Connect Ventures, and Joey Brander, who we first met several years ago when we led the seed investment out of what was then Connect Ventures as a joint venture with NEA. Today, however, Connect is a standalone vehicle in partnership with CAA, and happy to jump in. So, gents, let's start with a simple one. At Connect, Mike, sports is a key pillar of our investment thesis. But why specifically tomorrow sports?
It's a good question because, as you can imagine, we've seen a lot of emerging sports, leagues and things like that have come out, whether it's pickleball, sailing, basketball, winter sports, you name it, we've seen a ton. And I think ultimately our thesis is driven by distribution. So, one of the key sort of factors to drive revenue and success for an emerging sport league is the ability to have millions of eyeballs on the property. Whether that's digital or traditional media, it doesn't necessarily matter, but they have to be able to drive an audience, a large, sustainable audience that they can create a lot of content for. And what we saw with Tomorrow and TGL specifically, is that they were bringing in sort of the best golfers in the PGA to compete over the course of a season, so creating multiple hours of content that, we saw what was tailwinds already for golf and sort of the digital space. You saw what was happening on YouTube with things like Good Golf and others like that, that was driving a much younger audience. Even if the PGA audience on linear was getting older, there was a next generation of golf fans that there wasn't something being built for them, even though they were craving it. So, from our standpoint, between what was happening in golf sort of online, and then also sort of the way that Tomorrow was thinking about how to position and program TGL, and also the fact that it was always named Tomorrow Sports. It wasn't named Tomorrow Golf. The goal from day one was to be going into multiple leagues, multiple sports, to create even a larger library of programming and hours of content that they'd be able to sell. And because media rights and sponsorship are really sort of the two most important revenue drivers of a new emerging league, eyeballs was definitely the number one thing that we thought about.
Makes a lot of sense. And Joey, if I'm remembering back to 3 to 4 years ago at this point, you guys were starting this league with, a couple nobodies, right? Tiger Woods and Rory McIlroy. So obviously you had a bunch of very interested investors. Why Connect?
Yeah, I think we have tried to maximize for value add, for expertise and relationships in our core spaces, for the ability to help us solve problems and capital partners that were willing, especially in the early days, to roll up their sleeves and that could drive the ball forward. And I think, Connect was and continues to be an incredible example of that, obviously with the connectivity across CAA and NEA. Folks that have built incredible businesses in sports and have seen incredible businesses in traditional venture, on the NEA side, and Mike Blank and you, Adam, with all of your expertise and connectivity across our core industries. It was a no-brainer. We had 3 term sheets to lead that initial round, and obviously ultimately selected Connect, and have been thrilled about it.
We are too. Taking a step back for either of you, you mentioned obviously media rights, sponsorship, all the sort of different pieces of the equation that help accrete value in this space. How do you think about live sports specifically in the AI era?
Yeah, I think we talk about this a lot, and it's been interesting to see the evolution of sports as part of a broader AI strategy. The number of traditional Silicon Valley venture firms that we've had calling us over the last few months as they're thinking of businesses that are insulated from AI disruption or that are direct beneficiaries of the continued proliferation of AI. And I think sports, live events, live content is right at the epicenter of that. I think that on one hand, as people have more and more leisure time or discretionary time, they want to allocate that time to things that they're passionate about, and sport has always been one of those things. But I also think that as more of our lives are automated, as more content is AI generated, it's hard to tell what's real and what isn't. The one thing that you can't replicate is the sense of tribalism and community that you see in sport that is so authentic and ingrained in all of us, all around the world, across cultures, across belief systems. That community of sport is such an incredible thing. And two, the spontaneity, the unpredictability of live sport. You never know what's going to happen. The raw emotion that you see the best athletes in the world feel as they're out there on the field of play, doing everything in their power to win or obviously not. It's so hard to replicate that, and I don't think anybody wants to see AI bots play a sporting event or robots play a sporting event. They want to see human beings go through the trials and tribulations of working to get to the pinnacle of their field.
You don't think the hole-in-one celebration would have been the same if it was an AI sort of robot who hit that?
I don't think it would have been the same. If we had a 7-5 robot facing off against the Knicks in the finals, I don't think that would be as exciting as seeing Wemby. I mean, it's the human element of sport that makes it so compelling, and is going to continue to be the case. And so I think we've been very pleasantly surprised to see how many traditional tech funds are looking just for not as incredible concentration within their portfolio, but to at least get exposure to some of these spaces that are both insulated from and beneficiaries of AI.
The only thing I would add to that is, we also agree that in the AI era, there's a premium on the human experience that we'll see. But, sports is one of those places that we do feel is an AI hedge, but it's not anti-AI, right? Like, these are businesses still that can benefit from AI innovation in terms of scheduling and umpires and, fan engagement and distribution of content and all sorts of things are going to help sort of the proliferation of sports, I think, globally. So it's still very pro-AI and will benefit from AI. But to your point, in a world where people are getting more efficient, hopefully having more, discretionary time to do the things that they love, sports is one of those things, for sure.
Yeah, no, for sure. Joey, with tomorrow specifically, tell us about the key principles of the business, right? How did what you do with TGL lead to WTGL? How does that extend to flag? Obviously, there's sort of a bit of a difference in how the leagues are all set up, and specifically TGL and WTGL as well. Like, talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, but I think from day one when we first came together, with Tiger and Rory in the midst of COVID in 2020, I think it was obvious that the value of live sports was continuing to increase, the cultural relevance of it as well, which has only been accelerated today. But the way that fans were consuming live sports was changing. Fans are looking for and are continuing to look for shorter form, faster paced, star-driven, more immersive, more data-driven content. And I think that we recognize that if you could take a sport that has an existing large global addressable market of fans and create a modern media version of it that is perfectly tailored for how fans want to consume sport or live content of any kind today, not only could you more efficiently monetize the existing fan base, but you could broaden it, scale it, diversify it, make it younger, et cetera. And so when we started out, I think we recognized that, one, doing that in a way that's complementary to the existing ecosystem is really helpful. That's why we went out, we partnered with the PGA Tour. For TGL, we partnered with the LPGA. For WTGL, we recently announced a partnership with the NFL to build out professional flag football. Partnering with the leading league or governing body in that sport, who is a helpful and willing partner and provider of best practices, promotional support, commercial introductions, et cetera, allows you to scale so much faster and more efficiently And everything that we try and build is also directly beneficial to the existing league or governing body because, there are a lot of fans that are now following the PGA Tour or the players in it because TGL was their gateway into the sport. Maybe they thought golf was too slow or boring or, they don't have time to watch a sun-up to sundown broadcast on a Thursday or a Friday, but they can tune in for 2 hours on a Monday or Tuesday on ESPN and find a favorite player and find a rival and then start following them on the PGA Tour. The average age of our audience was about a decade younger than a traditional golf audience, so significantly more young people tuning in. So,
and you're not cannibalizing that existing audience.
Correct. It's building it, it's scaling it, and we are the only golf on television in prime time on Mondays and Tuesdays. If you are a diehard golf fan and you're looking to see the best players in the world compete and you know that Tiger or Rory or JT or whoever is playing on ESPN, you probably want to tune in. But also if you're a fan of the NFL or the NBA or the MLB, you may want to tune in because it's compelling content. And I think that same thesis is true, now with flag football in partnership with the NFL is, working with them, helping drive, additional fans, additional participation, and creating a modern media version of a sport that's been growing, exponentially around the world in flag, and that'll also be in the Olympics starting in 2028.
Well, and NFL fandom is year-round.
Yeah.
Right? But there's only so much expansion they can do on the schedule. They might go from 17 games to 18 games, but they're not going to go to 50 games a year and playing every single weekend. So creating sort of media properties for them, sports leagues, and opportunities for them to express that fandom in new ways, is a sort of interesting opportunity for sure.
And you mentioned content specifically, and Mike, to your point, 17, 18 weeks, not being able to have 55 weeks, or 52 weeks, et cetera. When you look at the sort of TGL season, right, and it's obviously, it's a few months long, but the content continues, right? Like, talk about the importance of, in this day and age, right, the always-on sort of content and continued engagement with your fans and these younger fans specifically throughout the year.
I think that starts from the initial ideation and creation of the format, the rule set, et cetera, having a thought in mind of what are moments that can live on social media in the days following the match itself, where yes, we've got our 2-hour windows a couple of days a week where we're live all around the world, but how do you bake in those moments that have an opportunity to be viral? In TGL, we have some incredibly creative holes that force the players to hit shots that you often never see them hit or rarely see them hit on the PGA Tour. They're mic'd up, and so they start talking strategy, reading putts with their teammates. You get kind of an insight into how they think that you often don't get in traditional golf. I think they're allowed to be themselves more, and after the Tom Kim hole-in-one that sent Jupiter to the playoffs this year, and you had a massive fist pump from Tiger. You had Max Homa body check Tom Kim in celebration. You had Kevin Kisner dancing on the field of play. All of those moments went crazy on social media afterward, and you often don't see that, obviously, in the traditional environment. So thinking through, what are those handful of moments in a match and over the course of a season that are different than what people are used to seeing, are compact, are interesting, are shareable, and that you anticipate to have that, rewatch factor in the days following to keep the conversation going.
Well, it's a huge benefit to the golfers that have participated in TGL, right? Like, golf is a sport that historically was played during the day, and that's when you would watch it. So these folks have never been on primetime television before, being able to attract a primetime audience in the same way, and you're sort of seeing the ripple effects and the benefits. You mentioned Tom Kim, like, the number of social followers that have increased post these moments and the opportunities then on the sponsorship side and everything that goes along with that. It's just creating sort of new exposure and exposure to these younger fans you talked about, because the TGL audience being almost a decade more younger than the PGA audience.
So, speaking of sort of net new products in the emerging sports space, right? Because to your point, Joey, everything you've done, right, has been very strategic in terms of partnerships, right? It's partnering, as you said, PGA, LPGA, the behemoth in the NFL. But Mike, we've seen, come across our desks over the course of the last several years since making the Tomorrow investment, probably dozens, right, of investments potentially to make in emerging leagues. As it relates to everything else out there, right? Tell us sort of what you think and why we haven't made some of those other investments.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think that it's hard to say you're going to be investing in emerging sports by investing in new leagues. I think that tomorrow's sports specifically is sort of uniquely positioned to be able to build leagues in partnership with existing entities in a way that no one else really is, because they've executed on it, they have a track record of success, and they have the infrastructure that allows them to do that. So, it's kind of like when sort of the early investors of Uber, they said, okay, great, are you going to invest in the next Uber, the Uber of X, the Uber of Y, the Uber of whatever, in success, Uber became the Uber of food, and Uber became, the Uber of last mile delivery. And in the same way, we sort of look at tomorrow's sports and say, okay, great, should, instead of saying, okay, we're the flag football version of tomorrow's sports, it's like tomorrow's sports should be the flag football version of tomorrow's sports. So I think for us, that's something that we're really excited about and that we think about all the time. And as I mentioned before, a lot of times these emerging leagues that you're talking to, you might see great participation or interest from players, at a sort of amateur level, but that doesn't necessarily translate to the desire to watch a professional version of a league. And ultimately, if you can't get, what I mentioned before, the sort of millions of eyeballs necessary to get the flywheel of professional sports going, being so driven by sponsorship sales and media rights and the things that require sort of those millions of viewers, prolonged over the course of a year, right? You can maybe do it for a singular event or a couple events a year, but that's really hard to build a long, sustainable business over something like that. So for our standpoint, as it relates to emerging leagues, we're particularly excited about what tomorrow is doing. But, in sports, there's a whole vast ecosystem that we can be investing in outside of emerging leagues, right? We think about sort of the sports tech ecosystem generally, the businesses that are being built and around professional leagues. We sort of mentioned, fan engagement and distribution and, on-field and off-field sort of productivity and all the things that go along with that. What's nice is a lot of our partners on the Connect side are sports team owners and folks that we helped actually bring into tomorrow at sort of various rounds and other things like that. And they say, they're being inundated right now, especially with AI opportunities that are disrupting sort of parts of maybe their ecosystems. And they're getting, 40, 50, AI businesses a day around fan engagement or ticketing or something like that. And they've told us, look, we're not equipped to evaluate these things. But you guys are. We'd love to send you deal flow to be looking at these things. And ultimately, if you invest in one of those, we'd love to be sort of early customers of those products, put them into our ecosystem, because now you sort of validate which one you think is the winner in the space and the best product in the space. And ultimately, they're also looking for co-investment opportunities.
I think, that's a good segue. Let's talk about sort of cap tables and the importance of that for a second. Obviously, very relevant in a room like this, right? So Joey, when it comes to sports investments, we tend to see a lot of famous faces and names out there. I believe tomorrow has over 24 major sports team owners on the cap table, over a billion social followers when you think about the individuals who have invested in
at least 500 of those are mine.
That is true. And some of the most notable institutional investors around. So what specifically do you look for in a capital partner and why?
I think I'm going to have to fact check that 500 and maybe a little less than that. But no, I mean, we've had a lot of incredible people that have believed in us and our vision from the early days of the business and have continued to all the way through. As you said, we've got about 24 major sports team owners. We've got everyone from Justin Bieber and Shohei Ohtani and 6 F1 drivers and Steph Curry and on the athlete and entertainer side. Which I think the biggest thing there is that was not celebrity for celebrity's sake. There was nobody, not a single one of them got a preferred term or a discounted anything or a free anything or compensation of any kind. They wrote checks at the same terms as everybody else because they were passionate about the business and wanted to add value. And we've seen that, the number of those names that have posted on social media on our behalf because they're a fan and they're watching TGL and they're following along, or the number of them that have come to matches, and sat greenside or sat in the owner's box and been a part of, the ESPN broadcast. Over the last few years, we've had everything from Celine Dion, coming and singing during a commercial break to Travis and Jason Kelsey being a part of our ESPN broadcast this year, to a lot of folks in between. All of that helps, drive cultural relevance and bring new eyeballs to the table. And then on the institutional side, obviously with folks like Connect and Don Cornwell at Dynasty and in Flag, we had an incredible group of partners with Sixth Street and Silver Lake and Bessemer and Arctos and Ariel and Blue Pool and a bunch of others. It's bringing best practices, folks that have been a part of the most successful businesses, both in and out of our spaces, that can help us, make the strategic decisions or make the introduction that matters. We've been really lucky to have, what I think is a truly best in class, group of capital partners.
And when you think about sort of, how the teams were formed and which owners came into that, and you think about, some of the other businesses, in and around the sports tech space from some of the investors that you have, like how calculated was, putting that group together, and even the step functions of when those folks came into the round and how you announced those and all of that?
Yeah, the team ownership piece, I think, was just as, kind of methodical and strategic. We had some competitive processes to be team owners in TGL and now WTGL. We just announced yesterday Steve Cohen, who's the owner of our New York team in TGL, was also going to be the owner of our New York WTGL team. In TGL, we've got Arthur Blank, Fenway Sports Group, Steve Cohen, David Blitzer, who partnered with Tiger, Alexis Ohanian, Mark Lazary, and now the Ford family, the Hamps in Detroit, who own the Detroit Lions. We tried to solve for, again, how do we broaden the fan base, and how do you bring owners of other teams in other leagues in the markets that they're looking to represent in TGL to the table, that are willing to utilize those other teams to promote and accelerate awareness and the development of our fan base. And so when you see over the last 2 years, Fenway using Red Sox social media to promote their TGL team, or having the TGL players throw out first pitches at games, or Arthur, marketing to his Falcons email database, or having activations around the stadium, mobile simulators branded around his TGL team, that allows for thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people that may not be following golf social media or may not be tuning into ESPN all the time to discover who this team is and who this league is. And even if you convert a small percentage of them, that is meaningful incremental growth to the core fan base that we started with. So we really tried to be strategic in who we selected, especially in some of the more competitive markets. Steve in New York is another great example, obviously, with the Mets.
Now, obviously, this is based from a physical standpoint down in, near Palm Beach, Florida. But I think, is it 135 international markets? 150 international markets. When you even think about the players that are on each of the teams, right? And when you think about those international markets and the reach, right? What does international mean as you think about the business going forward?
Yeah, golf is a global game. Flag will be as well, especially with its inclusion in the Olympics and so many federations around the world, funding flag development programs. Using golf as the example, we really tried to ensure that all of the strategic media markets were covered, with stars competing in the league. We are live in 152 countries around the world, whether it's with Sky in the UK or JTBC in Korea, or Unext in Japan, or Foxtel in Australia. And we want to make sure that there is a star for those fans to tune in and cheer for, whether it's Hideki from Japan or Tom Kim from Korea or Adam Scott from Australia. I think we're covered in the UK several different ways with Justin and Tommy and so forth. How do we create those clear lines of connectivity for fans all around the world? Especially focusing on the largest media markets, the largest golf markets, and also certain markets that already have an interest or a passion in technology-infused sports, like Korea as an example, where it's hard to walk a couple of blocks down the street without seeing a golf simulator bar or cafe. There have been amateur leagues on television in Korea for years that have done really well. How do we make sure that we've got a team that we can immediately point them in the direction of, this is your favorite team?
I think it was obvious that golf was a global sport, and there was sort of global appeal for it. But I think there was a lot of, if you're on the outside looking in, you would see flag, and you would say, I don't really think of flag as a global sport, even if it's going to be in the Olympics. But when you really look at the numbers, there's more than 4 million people, like youth inside America, that are playing flag football, which is a great number. But there's 20 million people globally that are playing flag football. So there's already a huge global audience for flag, which we think is particularly interesting. And now being an Olympic sport, I think there's a sort of preconceived notion that this is going to be like a 92 dream team situation of the NFL players come in and dominate the rest of the world. But we've now had some exhibitions again, with flag players versus NFLers and things like that. And I think the understanding is that it's not, right? This is going to be a highly competitive global sport that already has, sort of amazing infrastructure built globally, and also just the ability to sort of pick up and play, right? What's hard about tackle football globally is that it requires pads and venues and all the things that go into it, whereas flag is like soccer in the sense that you really just need a football and some flags and you're good to go, and anyone can play anywhere, which for us from the global perspective is huge. And I think that's also one of the reasons when the NFL got really excited about it, they can see more participation in flag globally than potentially tackle.
Yeah, you've got the marketing and promotional focus of the NFL, flag being one of the most significant international growth drivers. You've got the Olympics as a catalyst. You've now got Division I sanctioning as a catalyst, where on the women's side, there are quite a few D1 programs that are now offering flag scholarships. I think we expect over the next few years, nearly every major collegiate program, just like you've got a star of, the star quarterback of Alabama or Ohio State on the tackle side, you'll have the star coming out of those major blue chip programs on the flag side. And on the women's side in particular, which I think is particularly, compelling here, this will be the highest level of professional football played by women, and if you think of it as the WNBA of the game of football, I think there's a really interesting opportunity to create stars, not just domestically, but all around the world as players start to build their brands coming through the collegiate ranks, the Olympics, and then eventually now into the pro league in partnership with the NFL.
Makes a lot of sense. All right, quick hits. So year one, TGL, Atlanta won. Year two, LA just beat Jupiter. What team takes it in 27?
It's a good question. This is not, financial advice or betting advice or any inside information. I think we've got a lot of really competitive teams. Jupiter, which was one of the worst teams, for a season and a half, had an incredible run into the championship and played, some phenomenal golf. I think it shows anyone can do it. I think if there's one team that I would spotlight, I think Boston has been one that every year I think a lot of people think are the favorites.
Is it really a grand slam for Rory if he doesn't win a TGL championship? That's
a very good question.
That's a good question.
With Rory obviously anchoring the team, they're always going to be competitive. So I would be on the lookout for them next season.
Cool. Favorite famous fan and why?
For me, we had a really fun time in season one where Josh Allen and about a dozen of his buddies came to a TGL match and then had his bachelor party on the field of play afterward, which a couple of us were able to participate in, which was a fun time.
Nice.
As they were, smashing balls into the screen until whatever time at night and, playing some competitive matches against each other. So Josh coming out and having that there was pretty cool.
And for Mike, Connects co-led the last 2 rounds in the business. 3 in a row?
I would say we have as much, if not more, conviction in tomorrow's sports today than we did when we led the seed round in 22 and co-led the Series A in 24. But we'll just have to see what happens.
Sounds good.
We're gonna negotiate the term sheet live on the iConnections AllCast after the panel.
Exactly. All right, thanks, guys.
Thanks, everybody.